as you speak.
Yes, yes, exactly.
يلا يلا be patient. يلا.
Well, maybe,
Ils
maybe,
sont supra excités parce que ce qui se passe,
yes.
ultra anxieux, ultra énervés, tout ça. Mais là,
But
c'est.
maybe this is the second day. The second
No, no,
day.
it's the first one.
Or is it?
It's not the same group who comes.
Oh,
It's two
really?
different groups who
Oh,
come
right.
and go.
Okay. Okay.
I asked them.
Maybe they've been given strict orders, from their teachers, in the sessions you've really got to listen
Even ours back there, strict you. But Anthony, one day I was invited to a Christian meeting of the parishes, all the Maronite parishes in northern Lebanon. So there were 660 students, boys and girls. And I entered. So people there are whistling for this leader, here, that leader, and here, this leader, and so on. Nobody was listening to us. There was Joe Hakim, you know Joe Hakim.
I know the name.
and since
We will do our best this morning. Maybe you don't need to shout if I'm bang. Peter will sit there. Peter will sit there. Peter sit where?
Là-bas, Peter. Mets-toi comme ça, Peter, comme ça je vais te voir.
Oui, parfait.
Voilà.
Vous avez besoin de ça.
Oui, j'en ai un là, c'est bon.
Celui-là, on l'utilisera aussi.
Oui, mais vous en avez, regarde, il y a un par personne. Oui, oui.
Join our party.
Absolument.
Vous êtes en
Tiens, regardez-moi. Regardez-moi. Là, regardez-moi.
chauffeur service par
Alors, est-ce qu'il y a une... 1, 2, 3. Il est 10h30. Est-ce que quelqu'un de l'organisation prend la parole? Non. Voilà. Eh bien, bonjour à tous.
So good morning, everyone. We're starting right on time. I'm Swiss and French. Switzerland is a country of clocks, so we like to start things on time. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you in this room, a full audience, and it's great to have you here for the World Forum on Peace. And I think all the testimonials and the storytelling that you're going to be listening to will probably cause some commentaries and comments. I'm Richard Verli, I'm a journalist. I think our names are going to be on the screen. Yeah, there you go. For the Swiss media Blick, which means look in German. This is in German for the German part of Switzerland, and in French for the French part of Switzerland, which you might know for some of you who've been to Switzerland. And I've been here twice already. This is my third time, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here again with you at the initiative and at the invitation of an organization which I want to mention straight away, Initiatives and Changes, an organization which you might not know, but I would encourage you to visit their website, Initiatives and Changes, Initiative et Changement. This is an organization based in Switzerland, close to Montreux. You may have heard of this city. There's a beautiful chateau there, which is a bit like a big meringue, called the Château de Caux, which is where the headquarters of Initiatives and Changes is since the end of the Second World War, with a goal to transform the world through people who have been transformed and who will be transforming others, or helping to transform people, or at least to influence on the world, have an influence on the world, especially in areas of conflicts and wars. These are people who really took responsibility of their destinies, and their goal is to change others. So here we have three extraordinary speakers today. I wouldn't say it is a chance, I would say rather it is unlucky because of the news, but these three people have worked hard on the issue of the Middle East. They know the Middle East by heart. They know the situation that's going on in Lebanon and in Israel by heart. And I'm sure that you all know, all you have to do is to open up your mobile phones or to watch TV to know that Lebanon right at this moment is in a very critical situation with some bombing from Israel every day. And as for Israel, of course, and we will commemorate in a few days the date of October 7 and what happened last year on October 7th, which I'm sure you've heard about this as well, when Hamas attacked Israel, and then that led to a war in Gaza. We have three guests today. I will start with a lady, Wadia Kouri. Wadia founded an NGO, actor for social changes. Before we started, she was telling me that just a few days ago, she was with a number of teachers that she's training. She's doing some training to change things in the southern part of Lebanon, which I'm sure is under bombing right now, under attack right now. And in the same day, she was able to go to the north of Lebanon through a route that is completely blocked nowadays because all the people from the south are trying to reach the north part of the country because of the bombing. So Wadia, through teaching, through teachers, those who are teaching you, through a group of teachers, she's been trying to influence the destiny of this fascinating country, which is of course fragile because very complicated, Lebanon. Then we have Assad Shaftari. Assad is very busy today. He's also on the last page of West France, local news media. For those of you who are watching West France, he will tell us more about his itinerary, his personal story, his own life, which has been the trigger of what he's doing today, his action. He's a former fighter for Christian forces in Lebanon at a time when you were not born, in the 70s and 80s in Lebanon, which was the civilian war. I'm not going to give you the whole history, but these were Christians against Palestinians, and then the Israelis, etc., etc. So everyone ended up in war. And everyone had a reason back then to wage war, and Assad took part in a number of these expeditions, and he will tell us more about this. And he became aware of the fact that it was no longer possible, but that with other fighters, other combatants who were part of this war, and other parts who were involved in this conflict, that with other people he realized that maybe they could change the course of things. And your organization is called Combattants pour la Paix, Fighters for Peace in Lebanon. These are people who were waging war, who were combatants of war, but who have now become combatants or fighters for peace with a similar approach, which is that of personal responsibility. Often we think that it will be states and organizations that will decide of everything, but his story, his itinerary shows us that individuals, men and women, have role to play to change things. And then we have Peter Chambrook, who is an historian. Peter, who is British or Irish? Both. Are you British or Irish? Okay, he's British.
En Normandie, les Britanniques, on connaît.
In Normandy, we're familiar with British people. So Peter has just released a book, which is only available in English at this time. Policy of Defeat, Britain and Palestine, 1914 to 1939. There again, those of you who might be interested in history might know that the actual territory of Palestinian, which is part of the Israeli territory, was under the British mandate at the time. Lebanon was under French mandate, and the UK at the time was in charge of these territories, which now are being disputed between Israel and the Palestinians. And Peter explains in his book, Policy of Deceit. He just gave the copy to me today. I have not had time to read it. But the thing is that there are many things that both British governments and other governments avoid saying about what they did back then, what they had promised, and what they did not do. And that part of the roots of the conflict that we have today is probably also as often in the past. So Peter will tell us more about this. He will speak in French. He will speak in French. He will speak in French. But when you will ask questions, and I would encourage you to ask questions, he might answer back in English, but I can see a number of people who have headsets, so you'll be able to have the simultaneous translation. Thanks to our friends who are there in the back.
Je ne sais pas si vous traduisez du français à l'anglais aussi, non? Peut-être pas. Oui, d'accord.
So there are English speakers among us, so there are people who can listen to the translation in English right now.
Commencer par le récit personnel.
So let's start with a personal story, which probably is a greater echo with what's going on at the moment. I'm a journalist, so of course I'm interested in what's going on, and I'm sure these are the information that you are hearing or receiving, even though it may seem far away, but it is of concern to all of us because the Middle East, that is Israel, Syria, Lebanon, as we call it, has a characteristics that everything that happens over there actually has an echo here in the Mediterranean region, has a direct influence or consequence for us here in Europe and especially in France. So Assad was a player, an actor of a past war. Now there is another war going on. Therefore, my question will be easy. And Assad, of course, you can tell us about your story. My question is easy. Are combatants or fighters for peace like you, people who went from war to peace, who changed camp, was that possible when you did it in the 80s, 90s? Is it still possible nowadays?
Bonjour tout le monde. Sur ces mains, il y a du sang.
There is blood on these hands. You can't see it, but I see it every day. Even though I wash my hands, even though I wash my heart, but once you've had blood on your hands, it stays forever. I was your age, probably, when my civil war started. I think I was actually a lot younger when I heard of the fact that there were others, that not all of us were Christians in Lebanon. And little by little, I learned bad things about this other one. No one talked about their qualities. Unfortunately, the other one to me was a Muslim. No one ever told me about their qualities, but only their defects. They were like that, like that, like that. They were doing this, that, and the other. Not only there were social differences, but little by little, there were also political differences. I understood later on that there were political differences, that they were expecting a lot of other things which were presented as bad, and they wanted to replace a cedar tree on our flag by a palm tree representing Islam. And I believed in what I was told. I had never met a Muslim before. I had a few friends in my classroom who were Muslim, but they were Christianized because we were in a Christian school. So these Muslims were not really Muslims anymore. The Muslims were what I was hearing about, bad people, evil people, etc., etc. And they were reproducing like rabbits. To become more numerous than Christians in my country, I wanted a Lebanon that would be westernized the way I had known it, whereas the others wanted to do something else out of it. So after the arrival of 600,000 Muslims in Lebanon and 40,000 soldiers and the formation of different military armies and communists who were committed for violence, etc., and many other organizations, then I thought to myself, I needed to start defending my country, the idea that I had of my country. This was the Lebanon of Christians with a few Muslims, which you still had to accept. But they needed to remain second-class citizens. I was much better than them. I was more educated. I was trilingual, etc. They were just poor people that needed to stay that way. That's what I believed. So when the war started, I took part in the war for 15 years until I became the second person in charge of the Christian camp. I was fulfilling a task which I considered to be sacred, to serve a sacred cause. I was probably the last protector. I believed I was the last protector of Christianism in the Middle East and maybe in the world. And believe me, I did everything I could to defend my Lebanon. I had decided that I would not kill any civilians, but with collateral damage, but because of collateral damage, unfortunately, everything was good enough for my cause, to defend my cause. So I could decide of the death of someone and then go home at night with a free conscience, because this was a sacred cause. And this is what is causing today what we are seeing in our region, a sacred cause, be it Jewish, be it Muslim, or whatever. Many, many different causes, and everyone believes that their own cause is the right one. So towards the end of the war, because of a peace agreement that had been refused by part of the Christians, I found myself being chased away from the Christian regions, to go and live on the other side, where the others lived. I thought I would never survive there. Others were going to kill me, of course. So I was between two parts. I had become a traitor for the others, and the others wanted to kill me. But that's when I came across some changes. Because first of all, people accepted me, and that was quite something. Then they asked me a few questions. Are you on the right side or on the bad side, on the wrong side? Of course, I was on the right side. I was serving a sacred cause. They smiled and they said to me, would you be willing, because you want to change everyone else, you want to change Christians, change Muslims, change Palestine people, would you yourself be ready to change? I couldn't find anything that needed to be changed in me, of course, but little by little they encouraged me to look at myself in the mirror, and in the mirror I saw a monster with blood on his hands. Is this me, really? How did I become like this? I was like you. I was someone normal. I was a young engineer. I was like you, a young person. This was a shock to me. It's hard to wake up, but
Et c'est grâce
thankfully I woke up
l'accompagnement des équipes d'initiative et
thanks
changement
to
séculaire.
the help of people from
Et
initiatives
c'est là
and
aussi où
changes.
j'ai
I was
rencontré
able to
l'autre,
do that. That's
enfin.
when I
Trop
really
tard,
met
mais je l'ai rencontré.
the other. It
Et
was
j'ai
too
découvert
late,
que
but
cet
still I
autre
met
me
the other.
ressemblait.
And I
On
realized
avait
that
des
the other
différences
one
qu'on
looked
n'avait
like
pas
me. We had
nécessairement à se
similarities.
ressembler.
We didn't
Mais
have
il
to look
fallait
alike, but
s'accepter les uns les
still we
autres.
had to
D'abord,
accept
apprendre
one
à s'écouter
another.
les uns.
We had to learn to
Je
listen
croyais
to
que
one
c'était-
another.
comme je détenais la
I
vérité,
thought
la
I
seule
had the
vérité,
truth, the only
c'était pas la
truth,
peine d'écouter l'autre.
that there was no point in listening to the
Bla, bla,
other
bla.
one, blah, blah, blah. You can say whatever you want. I'm going to tell you my theory and you can just shut up. But then I found out that the other one also had his truth or her truth, and I had to listen to them. And the truth of what was going on, or the truth of what's going on here in this room is your truth, the truth of this lady, this gentleman, the truth of all of us. It's a group truth for all of us here in this room. It was then also that I learned to collaborate with the other one, to trust the other one, and then to love the other one. And when I started loving the other one, he disappeared. Today I don't have another one or the other. You can be from Pakistan, from Sudan, France, whatever. There is no other in my life. I belong to humanity. So later on, my own son was 14, 15, who already had some prejudices against Muslims. Then I had this inspiration, and I felt I needed to apologize publicly. Because I had heard at initiatives and changes something key which helped me change. Would I like to remain a victim of the situation in which I am and a victim of the things I had done in the past? Or could I transform myself into someone responsible of my own actions, responsible of what's going on around me, responsible of my community, my country, and even of the whole humanity. So I made a choice, a second choice, that was to become responsible of my past. So I wrote a letter to ask forgiveness to the victims of their parents, because many of them were no longer there. I had forgiven in the same letter, and I promised before God, before men, and before justice to try to warn other people, especially you young people, so that you would not go towards violence or the ignorance of the other. Meeting the other is something very important. Learning to know the other, understanding the other is something very important, because that way we can avoid a lot of troubles. Later on, we founded Combattants pour la Paix, Fighters for Peace. There were 5 of us initially. In 2012, the war was over, civil war was over in 1990. And now there's about 100 of us, of former fighters of the civil war, who have all changed and ready to speak in public of our sorrows, of our regrets, of what we did, of the atrocity of war. War is ugly. Believe me, war is ugly. And also to speak to former soldiers so that they could stop talking about the good old days of the civil war, you know, when they had weapons and women and cars and everything else. But no one talks about the atrocity of the war, of death, of people who are displaced, destruction. War is very ugly. And also that it could be avoided. That's the main message, the key message, in my view. War, violence creates violence worse as a reaction. So we had to break the cycle of violence, and we had to decide to no longer be violent, so that by reaction the other would stop and break or come out of this cycle of violence. How much time do I have left? I was going to come back to one question, and then we will give the floor to Wadia. Do you have the feeling, did you have the feeling back then when you were fighting that this was a time there was no internet, there was maybe a knowledge of the other which was more limited? Nowadays everyone is communicating with everyone, but is there still another in the same way as there was to be, there was before? Yes, we know the other, but this knowledge is very much biased. We have a filter here somewhere, and everything that confirms my theory or my vision of the other, I would accept it and adopt it, whereas everything that goes against, I would refuse it and I'd throw it away. But really, I should do the opposite. I should accept everything, not only to hear about what the other, but to go and knock at their door. Listen, I was told that you hate me. Even in the classroom, can I find out why you hate me? What did people tell you about me? I'd like to tell you about what I feel towards you, what I know of you, and let's check together if what we have been saying about one another is true or not. That's the shortest way, but unfortunately we avoid taking that path. I wonder why. I did it my whole life, but now I've learned that we shouldn't do this. Thank you very much. I think we can clap Assad for his testimony.
So please do not hesitate once again to ask questions after the panel. Wadia, as I said, she focuses her action on teachers, because teachers, those who teach you, your professors, are actors for change. Those of you who will become teachers, if there are some among you. Wadia, first of all, tell me, why did you choose, and why do you think today that it is through teaching that social change can appear? And especially in a country like Lebanon, when and I really want to hear you, we see that say that the state is in a very bad situation, and I believe that this has repercussions on education. Please tell us about this. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Please allow me to stay seated. Imagine that it is a conversation in a living room, for example. I'm going to answer first your questions and then elaborate on what brought me to this conclusion. You know that teachers today spend a great time, quality time with their students, and that the period during COVID with online teaching, it was very detrimental to teaching. And this shows how central the role of teachers are, despite all of the technological progress. And you spend most of your conscious time with educators, teachers, not only in schools, but whereas at home you study, you eat, it's time to eat, time to sleep, and you spend a lot of time on your screens. Right? So this means that the teachers have a great role to play, to really be role models for change. And I'm going to dig further into this. But first, I want to tell you that the period that Assad was doing his military duty, I was still a child. During the first year of my life, I spent those years in an atmosphere of bombings, attacks, terrorist attacks. And I spent my time either going to shelters with my parents or welcoming refugees from other regions, namely other students who were thrown into our classrooms, and we needed to adapt to a new group every year. There was never any stability. It was always something new that we needed to adapt to. There wasn't any censorship as today. I was open to I heard all the conversations of the adults, and I heard to all those dead ends, all those wars that were waged, and the 15 years of civil war. It's just not one war, more than 20 wars that invited themselves into our country. And there was this mix of exterior, regional wills, and it wasn't anything linear at all. And I wondered, as a child, I was asking very early questions. I thought it was very early. Who started this? Who's right? Why do Palestinians and Israelis want to kill us, each in their turn? So it's a different mix from what Hassan just explained. I'm more from the peripheral part, closer to the Muslims. And I thought, why are we hated? It was always an attitude as a victim. This is what I heard. And why do people come in and cut our throats in Lebanon? Why is it a permanent threat? Why do people say they're going to eliminate us? Are we hateable or hated without any reason? And how do wars end? And very clearly, I'm telling you, just as you had heard testimonies about children in Gaza. Children 7 years old said, I want to die. I also, at that age, thought, if we die, that will be easier under the condition that I would die with my entire family, with one bomb, one shell, because I couldn't face being separated from my family. So at 7, I said, I want to die. We are all traumatized people. We need to accept it, but there is hope. We can survive after this. This has clearly added a lot of fear and hate in my heart, and this is unavoidable, all these hardships, living permanently with this fear of dying. For us, militiants, people who replaced the army after its division in Lebanon because of this divide with the communities, they were heroes, not zeros, heroes. Heroes for us. They were saints, people who were going to save us. And when we heard these horrible actions, rapes, taxes, illegal taxes by these militia, we saw things in black and white. Everything was justified. We were saints and they were the terrorists. And it happened, well, last year I was in Norway and I listened to people from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, ladies especially who came from these countries at war, and they saw things in black and white only. And I thought, oh, what can they have so much to discover, because in reality, when the ceasefire takes place, when the armed conflicts stop, this is when another war appears. How do you accommodate to these disruptions, all of the former armed groups that take power, and we continue to live with the repercussions of chaos? It is easy to fall into this attitude of putting yourself as a victim, and what can I do? We are incapable in Lebanon. A great part of our power is under the power of the militias. I'm not going to name them, it's quite sensitive, but this is where we are. Something major took place during these years after the war, a few years after the war, whereas we were trying to reorganize our lives. Usually, the church does not organize these are things for one occasion, but we wanted to.
Les synodes, c'est la réunion des évêques.
So it's the meeting of the bishops, the synod. So the Vatican called upon all of the bishops to come to the Vatican, and there was a consultation of all of the Lebanese people, and I received a questionnaire that I was able to answer to. It was very important, and then we received the memorable visit of Pope John Paul II, who came with everything he represents and everything he experienced to say that Lebanon is just a simple, pure country. It's a country of conviviality that we must unite, and he called us to purify memories. It was a very beautiful event. Myself, I was able to say hello to him and at the last minute for security reasons, but it wasn't for me the beginning of an interior peace. It was the beginning of a great interior fight, because I thought, okay, The ideal is to collaborate, but how can you collaborate with someone who has contradictory values to mine? How open up to a community whose religious teachings contain so many biases against my community? And I closed into this reasoning more and more. But I had to open up and make the effort to go towards others and build friendships that were impossible for me up to now. And I started discovering how much people, others, need stability, truth, just like me. And during one of the meetings that I pushed myself to go to people and meet them. And I didn't have to judge. I met a friend who became a great friend, a Shiite, who is now dead. Hanifas, a great friend.
Les chiites sont
The Shiite is,
je fais un peu d'explication de texte.
I'm just going to
Les chiites
explain
sont
things.
une
The
des
Shiite is
communautés
one of the
musulmanes du
Muslim
Liban,
communities
celle
in Lebanon
dont on parle beaucoup
that
parce
we
qu'elle
talk
ont
about
son sein,
extensively
elle comporte le
because
mouvement
they
Hezbollah,
have
dont
the
vous avez
Hezbollah
entendu parler,
movement
et les sunnites
within it.
sont
And the
une autre
Sunnite
communauté
is
musulmane
another
du Liban.
Muslim
Voilà,
community
pour
in
l'explication
Lebanon,
de texte,
just to
pardonnez-moi.
explain things. It was another opportunity to see that amongst the Shiite, not everyone is pro-Hezbollah. So they have their own specificities. And he entrusted me with something very intimate. He said, when I stay or reside more than 2 weeks in my village, I have fear scenarios. I wonder whether Christians, Sunnites, or together, they are not plotting something to eradicate me. And I told him, I feel exactly the same. We decided that we were condemned to mix in order to dismantle and undo these biases, because we are hurt people, and these wounds will be with us our entire lives, and we need to face this. So this was my first discovery. And then came my great experience with initiatives and change. I joined a leadership program training. I was 19 years old at the time, and I spent an entire year in India and Southeast Asia, traveling to 11 countries with the son of the Mahatma Gandhi. It was I was 20. I was going to be 21, in fact. It was just after the terrorist attacks of September 11th in the United States that created a huge change in international policies and a great fear against Muslims. People thought I was a Muslim because in people's minds in the Western world and Eastern world, people thought, Lebanon, you're Muslim. They didn't think we were Christian. So I was reproached things that were nasty. I was called a terrorist or accused of being one, and I thought that I was giving, as an answer, this idea of aggressivity because I needed to defend myself. And for the first time, I was in the shoes of my opponents. And with all this nastiness or meanness, I thought, okay, as a person that started to be trained in teaching, I know what you expect from the others you'll receive. If you say that the student is a good student, he will become so. But if he's told he's a bad student, he will tend to become one. So Isaac the Syriac said, if you treat the other as a saint, he will become one. If you treat him as an enemy, he will become even meaner than he is. This is a great responsibility. So with time, I realized that in fact, meanness doesn't mean it belongs to people in one community. It's part of human nature. And in all communities, nastiness or meanness is based on ignorance. Analyze all the nastiness in the world. Even narcissists are impossible. They weren't able to heal a certain wound and change it into a resurrection. For me, it became very clear. Instead of focusing on finding the enemy I needed to fight against, I thought that the only enemy are my fears, my ignorance, and the only resistance is not against people, but my inside terrorist thoughts. How can you convey these convictions necessary to contribute to the reform? I know myself. I not fall into polarization or biases. It doesn't happen any longer, or if I do so, it's for a very short period. This saddens me that in the world today, in order to help the cause, the fair cause of a community, people trigger the fears, and it's as if we had one soccer team against the other, Palestinians and Israelis, or terrorists or others. In fact, we are all alive in the same period. It's as if you and me, we were traveling in the same train. I do not travel with your great grandparent, and you're not traveling with my grandchildren. We're traveling together, and if we are able to travel together, in fact, in the same train, we are all in danger at the same time. We cannot go against the one who built the engine, or we need to think scientifically what holds behind this danger, behind the locomotive. So why don't we do it? Each time there is a defeat, a security defeat, as on the 7th of October, as on the attack, during the attacks on Lebanon today. We need to know why it started. And let's talk about teachers now. For teachers and agents of change, it was a great achievement, as I said. I thought teachers are important agents, and we often marginalize them. We say students are at the heart of teachings, but who does it? I saw that among teachers and professors, there are builders of positive change. During a terrorist attack that damaged 70 houses in Lebanon, the teachers, like myself, came every day to wear an overall and work to rebuild. We finished in 2 months the reconstruction of these units, all of these homes, whereas our state imagined until then how to start this renewal. So if you have faith, even very young, you can change mountains, you can move mountains. I always thought, what does that mean? And I saw students and with teachers really moving mountains of debris and changing things in a few minutes. And during a trip to Iraq, after the attacks in 2010 on the Christian community, I saw during the investigations that teachers were the ones who brainwashed the students to make them open to terrorism. And this is with the inspiration of a program, Education Today, that I started this program, Teachers, Agents of Change, because I worked on the word task. We do have a task to pursue. We are agents of change. And as a priority, we chose, in consultation with teachers in Lebanon, 2 priorities: conciliation between the Lebanese and the reform as being interdependent, because we cannot achieve a reform if we are not reconciled. So what is the vision? To build a minority with the teachings and teachers who see that it is not limited to the academic word, but to know how to be and can pass on these teachings to students. It is in 2 aspects. We need to train teachers to have a citizen common language built on active citizenship, critical mindset, participate, look at justice. Common values are the human virtues and values since the age of time. temperance, and also skills and competences, communication, mediation. And the most important is that I train teachers on how to embed all of this in the curriculum. The other part is helping teachers to face their own wounds. And in each school, I am creating a core group, a central group of teachers who accept to contribute with us to build the new national storytelling, integrating the entire storytelling in Lebanon. There are personal stories, what people experienced during the Civil War, during the wars today, and there's a lot of stories to listen to. Yes, you had a question? No, continue. I just wanted to maybe give the floor to Peter and then save time for questions, because I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions in the room. Just do the teachers today, are they easy to approach? Because sometimes teachers want to keep their independence, or they see you as a sort of intruder, somebody who is not necessarily welcome. In fact, I don't go to the schools, they call me, rather, and it's after some conferences, or sometimes I build pedagogical tools. There's an educational game that I have designed, and it's to open up to citizenship, activities to perform in groups, and this is what I am doing. But for the storytelling, they really are hungry for change, and this is with the economic and security defeat. Everybody wants change. I'd like to close with one thing. Amin Malouf, my compatriot, and yours, he's somebody we have in common. Amin Malouf, who is a writer, intellectual, and now Secretary General, perpetual secretary of the French Academy. You know that everything that happens in the Middle East affects us. What does he say? He says, because he talked about the problems in Lebanon and that are not isolated. It's not, oh, the poor Israeli, the poor Lebanese, the poor Palestinian. He wants to tackle the deep roots of the conflicts in Lebanon, as he very duly noted, can be compared to a rose tree, a wild rose tree around the vineyards. So I invite you to read this book that he wrote. This rose tree is very sensitive to diseases, and he warns farmers to see how they can protect the vine. Friends of Lebanon, he says, do not turn away from this wild rose tree. If you see these flowers tremble and then fall to the ground, beware if they are rotting. The entire vine will be in danger and future will be sour. It's a very beautiful quote and a very worrying one, because I don't know if the Lebanese rose tree, I don't know what the condition of it is today. You will give me your opinion later. Now we are going to move to a different framework. It's the historical backdrop, and maybe, well, often itinerary stories, less personal, because we have the chance with Hassad and Wadia to have these very personal testimonies, but I think that you learn this every day in your high schools. History has created the situations we are in today, and history has influenced the present. So, Peter, can you tell us where these troubles, these difficulties come from in a region that was called Palestine and is still so at the time? You will be the microphone bearer. Thank you.
I haven't spoken French for 30 years or so, so I want to apologize for my accent and for my speech. It's going to be very simple. As you can see, as you can hear from my accent, I come from the other side of the channel. However, I have a very deep link with and great affection for Normandy. This little box here contains sand from the Arromanches beach, which is one of my most precious good. My father was part of the first wave of the landing army on June 6, 1944, early in the morning, and almost drowned before reaching the beach. I was under attack of the German guns. 10 days later, he was deeply wounded by a mortar, a German mortar, and people did not expect him to live. He spent several months in hospital, and thankfully he was able to recover. When he died, some 33 years later, he still had pieces of bomb shells in his knee, of shrapnels in his knees and legs. He was my hero. Every writer has their own history that would influence their view, their worldview, their writing to one degree or another. We all have our own history, our own story. My worldview was fashioned mainly by three drivers: my parents, my association of 20 years with the Brotherhood of Initiatives and Changes, and many visits and many friendships. In the 70s, 1970s, 1980s, the Association of Brotherhood Initiatives and Changes, which I'm calling the World Ideology of Conscience, helped me discover the idea of a societal change, starting with a personal change and with the practice of daily listening to your inner voice in order to find inspiration and direction. This brotherhood also helped me discover the Middle East through various visits and through developing various friendships, and also being introduced to classic Arabic as a language. Through the following decades and through many years of university researches, and even more important, through visits to Bergen-Belsen, Verdun, Arromanches, and other places, and Jerusalem, among others. All these visits fashioned my worldview, my writings, in particular in this book. This book here, which I was showing you earlier on. Now, in order to start understanding today's conflicts, I would suggest studying three key elements. There are many others, of course, but three key elements. First, the history, the past. Past is not past. It's not even dead. Wrote the American novelist William Faulkner, which means that the legacy of historical events continues to fashion the present time. And in many ways, this actually explains the present times. Secondly, the natural resources. It is pivotal to study the rivalry of the great powers for the control of the natural resources on the planet. Lithium and other natural resources, minerals, other minerals which are fundamental to human survival. Then the third factor, hypocrisy, the gap between what people and governments say and what they really do. We're talking about hypocrisy here. The maintain of the control of supplies. Yes, oh, French, oh la la. In oil as well, this was one of the main factors, non-declared factors of the invasion of Iraq by the US. in 2003.
Le gouvernement
The
américain
war
n'a
for
jamais
oil. However,
mentionné
the
le
American
facteur
government
pétrole.
never mentioned this
Il a
oil
proclamé
issue,
que
but proclaimed
nous voulons
rather
répandre
that
la
we
liberté
wanted
et la
to take,
démocratie.
they wanted to spread democracy
Dans
and
mon
liberty.
récent, ouvrage,
In my
Politique
recent
de
book,
tromperie, Politique of Deceit,
Politics
Britain
of
and Palestine,
Deceit,
je
Britain
me
and
suis
Palestine,
efforcé de révéler la
tried
vérité,
to express the truth, such as I
de
see it,
rétablir les faits
to
concernant le
establish the
rôle passé
facts
de la
regarding the
Grande-Bretagne
role,
en
the past
Palestine,
role of Britain
de
in
décrire
Palestine,
les politiques, les
and
priorités
to
et les
describe
intentions
politics
cachées,
and the hidden
les
intentions
réalisations, les
and the
erreurs et les
achievements and the
tromperies,
errors and
britanniques.
mistakes and the British errors.
Je me suis rendu aux archives nationales.
So I consulted the National Archives, British Archives, in order to try to find out the facts. And I found myself with 10,000 photos and documents, which were all relevant of the period, secret documents of prime ministers and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the time. I also had other Hansard archives, written archives, public archives of the Parliament, 1.4 million of words. But the gap between the two storytellings, both private and public, was so striking, and it took me 7 years to write this book, and I came to two main conclusions here. First conclusion: the 100 Years' War for the control of Palestine started with our Prime Minister and our Minister of Foreign Affairs in London during the First World War. No British government ever acknowledged that. The British governments have proclaimed the opposite and continue to do so. During the First World War, the British government promised the Palestine region to the Arabs in 1915, but 2 years later, the government of Lord George promised the same region to the Jewish community in the world. Therefore, the same land had been promised to two different people. That promise of giving Arabs Palestine was a lie, and that was denied successively by the British government since 1920. My book suggests that it is time to acknowledge as a nation, to recognize officially our past errors and our deceitful policies towards all people between the river and the sea, or the Israeli or the Palestinians, without exception. The document that was ratified by the Society of Nations in July 1920, yes, in 1922. This was the body that was before the United Nations. I'm saying this because at the moment you have the General Assembly of the UN, but the Société des Nations, or the Society of Nations, was a predecessor of the UN, United Nations. So that document, signed in July 1922, had a contradiction, because it was acknowledging the establishment of a Jewish part in Palestine, and at the same time it was asking Great Britain, the mandatory power, to prepare Palestine to its own autonomy. However, right from the start, the pro-Zionist government of Lord George put in place an administration, unilateral administration of the colony, which was basically anti-Arab. And the British refused any form of constitutional development. This refusal of representative institution was never declared to the Palestinian Arabs. It was a systematic duplicity. Therefore, during 2 decades, Palestinian Arabs, who made up the great majority of the population, of the indigenous population, kept on receiving reassuring declarations, but they were deceitful from the various British governments concerning their own rights, including their political rights, which is an obvious example of hypocrisy and racism from a colonial power. Now, in 1948, after the Second World War, the British government, which was tired after the war, did like Pontius Pilate, and got rid of the Palestinian issue. The British pulled out and allowed the Zionist militia, who were well trained, they allowed them to organize a coup to chase away all the Palestinians from Palestine. This was an ethnic cleansing of Palestine and the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. In 1948, the Arabs were still a majority, 68% of the population, and possessed 93% of the land of Palestine under the mandate. The Jewish community, which represented 32% of the population back then,
essentiellement européen et urbain,
possessed about 7% of the land of Palestine at the time. But in 1948, the Zionist militia of Ben-Gurion created the State of Israel on 78% of the territory of Palestine. No British government ever examined or recognized the contradictory promises that their predecessors had made during the First World War concerning Palestine, nor the deceitful policies of the world, which inevitably conducted to the destruction of the Palestinian society and led to the conflicts which followed. The Israeli society was therefore profoundly traumatized, of course, since last October, but since 2007, more than 2 million Palestinian people from Gaza have been deeply traumatized, and tens of thousands of them were assassinated. This is not a conflict between two equal parts, but between an Israeli government, which is extremely powerful, with genocide intention, and a Palestinian people which is subjugated with hardly any power or military influence or economic or diplomatic influence, who refuses to give themselves over and be removed from history. The 3 pillars of Judaism are truth, justice, and peace. The essence of Judaism is compassion for your neighbor, your brother, the other. But through their policies, the Israeli extremist government, the current extremist government, has buried these pillars and has completely lost its compass, its moral compass. The current Labour Party in power in Britain is in a labyrinth, moral labyrinth, but is rather in the moral mud rather than in a labyrinth. They're in the mud. There are hardly any signs of these three essential elements to peace and justice. In English, we would say acknowledgement, accountability, and acceptance, the three A's, which are the key elements to peace. In French, it goes as acknowledging your errors, your mistakes, taking your responsibility, and respecting and accepting others. Thank you, Peter. We'll come back to you. One phrase left. Do not forget that peace is a fruit of justice and not its root. Without justice, there will be no peace.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Alors, comme nous sommes devant un public jeune,
Since
et je
we
sais que vos
have a
enseignants
very
peuvent
young
être avec vous,
audience, and I think your teachers are with you, you possibly do the work in your schools. But Peter, if you may, I will add on to what you just said. The first element is the situation of 1947-48 in Palestine. It was directly dictated by the Second World War and the extermination of Jews in Europe. Obviously, so it's not a continuation. What happened in 47-48 and the result of an international community that is traumatized and is trapped in the attempt to exterminate Jews during Nazi Germany, because Jews of after war are no longer the ones of before the war. The situation has radically changed. When it comes to what happened on October 7th, Peter didn't repeat it, but I know he knows it, obviously. On the 7th of October, it's an extremely violent action by the Hamas. I think that terrorism has always been part of war. Hassan knows something about this. It's an action that we can qualify of terrorist, but in Gaza, in the Gaza region, it was a very difficult region because population was closed in, the Palestinian population. Let's not forget the colonial context. The word was repeated at a number of occasions, and there's this decolonization that is violent in a number of places in the world. Unfortunately, we need to say that in all colonized situations and decolonization, terrorism was often present. Colonialism, decolonialism have often led to this. I wanted to add on to these words, but it's soon the commemoration of the 7th of October. The minister will express himself at the United Nations, and then the United States, Great Britain, but also Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have asked a ceasefire for 21 days, but I think we will wait and see. But the Prime Minister in Israel will refuse it. We have signs that he might refuse this possibility. I think that the presentations were long, but it was necessary to help you each time to understand the approach of a historian, Peter, of a fighter or former fighter or a soldier in the war who is now fighting for peace, and Hassan, who's fighting to educate and change the new generations. Wadia. I will now
important
give the
que
floor
vous
to the
puissiez
room
poser
because
des
it's
questions.
important for
Vous
you
pouvez
to
poser
be
les
able to
questions
ask
que
your
vous
questions,
voulez.
the questions you want
N'hésitez
to
pas,
ask.
y
Please do
compris
not
des
hesitate,
questions qui portent sur
including
l'explication. Il y a
questions
peut-être des choses que vous avez entendues,
that might
des
be
concepts,
on a
des
further
références historiques que vous
explanation,
n'avez pas bien
historical
comprises.
references that you
N'ayez
have
aucun souci
misunderstood.
avec ça.
No
Donc,
worries
on
with
va
that.
prendre les premières
We
questions,
will
et
now
s'il n'y a
take the
pas de
first
questions,
questions, and if we don't
ou
have
des
any
expériences
questions,
personnelles,
or personal
absolument.
experiences,
Assad tenait
yes,
beaucoup à ça.
absolutely.
N'hésitez pas aussi à faire part
Please
de vos
tell us
expériences
about your
personnelles
personal
confrontées
experience.
à ces réalités qui ne sont
This,
peut-être pas celles
Assad
du
insisted
Proche-Orient,
upon
encore plus.
this,
Peut-être que
and this
certains
may
parmi
be
vous,
experiences in the Middle East.
ont
Maybe
été
some of you
confrontés à
were
cette
confronted to
réalité
this
ou à d'autres,
reality, or any
situations.
other
Voilà, il y a un
situation.
micro qui va
A
circuler, il est
microphone
là.
will be passed
Le
around the
micro, je pense
room.
que quelqu'un va le faire circuler. Ah, il y a un autre micro
We
là-bas.
have two
Donc
microphones.
allez-y, levez
So
la main,
please go
posez
ahead,
des
raise your
questions.
hand,
Et
ask
encore une fois,
questions,
toutes les
and once
questions,
again,
mademoiselle qui est
all
là-bas,
questions are
ici
welcome.
aussi, et je prendrai les questions au fur et à mesure.
I will take
Vas-y.
them as they come.
Nous encore, on a vu avec l'Auschwitz
We
que
saw
la guerre, ça
that
venait,
the
de
war
raisons politiques.
came
Mais je
from
comprends pas du coup les
political
raisons politiques pour
issues,
lesquelles
but I don't understand why Lebanon, who is already having difficulties, is again at war, and part of the countries that are going to be
Alors, qui se risque peut-être,
destroyed.
Wadia ou Assad,
Who
qui
wants
se
to
risque à
answer?
expliquer
Wadia,
alors, pourquoi le Liban
Assad,
est à
why
nouveau
is
pris dans
Lebanon
une guerre et quelles sont les raisons
again,
politiques. Alors c'est, voilà,
in a
peut-être
war,
j'allais dire,
and
pardonnez-moi l'expression,
forgive
la
this
nouvelle
expression,
guerre
the
du Liban pour
new
les nuls.
Lebanese
On
war
explique
for
en quelques mots.
people who don't know anything about it.
Pas une guerre.
I
Je vous
hope it
remercie
won't be
pour
a
votre
war.
question.
I
En
thank you
fait,
for this question.
Dès le début des
Since the
événements de
beginning,
Gaza, Hezbollah,
the
qui est
Hezbollah,
très attaché à la
who
cause
is very attached to the
palestinienne et
Palestinian
qui a
cause
beaucoup souffert à cause des Palestiniens
and suffered
en tant
because
que
of-
communauté chiite
as a
qui vit,
Shiite community
sur les
that lives
frontières,
at the
avec
borders
Israël,
with Israel
durant des dizaines
for
d'années, a senti le
decades,
besoin
has
de
felt the
défendre
need
Gaza
to
à
defend
distance. À
Gaza
partir des frontières,
remotely
israélo-libanaises.
and at the borders,
Et je
at the
crois que
borders
c'est,
between Lebanon and Israel.
le tir
So
et la
I think
réponse,
that
le tir,
shooting
réponse
is
qui a
as an answer
engagé ce qui
that
risque
has
de devenir
engaged
une
what
guerre
may
ouverte
become an
dans,
open war
au Liban
in
et
Lebanon
éventuellement
and
dans la région.
eventually in the
J'espère que ce sera pas
region.
le cas.
I hope it will not be the case.
Le Hezbollah, je le
So
rappelle,
the Hezbollah, I'd like to
c'est une
remind
milice
you, is
chiite
a
libanaise,
Shiite
donc
and
musulmane chiite,
Lebanese
qui
militia,
n'est pas, c'est important
which
de
is
le
not
savoir,
that
le
important to
Hezbollah
say.
lui-même
The
n'est pas
Hezbollah
considéré
is
comme un
not
mouvement
considered
terroriste,
as a
c'est
terrorist
la branche
movement.
militaire
It is the
du
military
Hezbollah
branch
qui est considéré par l'Union européenne comme un
that is
mouvement
well, it's
terroriste, mais pas le
considered by
Hezbollah
Europe
lui-même.
as such,
Ça,
but
c'est important à le redire. Il y avait une main qui s'était levée
so
là-bas.
we had one hand
moi,
raised
j'avais
there.
une
Yes,
question
I
pour
have a
Monsieur
question
Assad
for Mr.
Chaftari.
Hassad Chaftari.
Avez-vous trouvé la paix avec
Have you
vous-même?
found peace with yourself? And if yes, what was the process you followed to get there?
Pour trouver la paix,
The process
si
to
tu l'as
find
trouvé
peace,
avec
if
toi-même.
peace was found with
En
yourself.
fait, je suis désolé, mais je
I
suis
am
chrétien,
sorry, but I'm
croyant, je
Christian,
crois en la
I'm a
bonté
believer, I'm religious,
de
I,
mon Créateur,
believe
et
in
Jésus-Christ
the
est venu nous
goodness of my
l'annoncer.
Creator.
Mais néanmoins, c'est
Nevertheless,
quand je suis oisif chez
When
moi,
I'm at
je
home, not
me
doing
sens,
much, I feel
coupable.
guilty.
Et plus je sens que mon
And the
pays
more I feel
est
that my
enclin à la
country
violence, qu'on risque d'avoir des
falls into
divisions
violence, that we could have interior divides,
déclenchement
this
d'incidents
triggers
et de conflits chrétiens, musulmans,
all of these incidents, political, religious, I feel responsible
et je me sens
again, and I feel guilty. Guilty because apparently I wouldn't have done enough in order to convince people who are on the streets that violence does not lead anywhere. I told you, you can wash your heart, wash your hands, but the blood remains and will follow you until your tomb.
D'autres questions?
Any
Est-ce
other
qu'il y a des mains qui
questions?
se lèvent? Oui.
Any hands going
Ici.
up? Yes.
Avec l'escalade de la violence au
With
Liban,
the escalation of violence in Lebanon, may we think that it's going to be a full war, total war, because all the characteristics are there, all the signs are there. There's the desire to eradicate. Civilians also are suffering.
Wadia.
Wadia.
On est dans le danger. Et il y a le danger.
Danger is present, and I'd like to take advantage of it to answer to the first question as well. Today in Lebanon, people are divided, deeply divided, separated between people who say, yes, if Israel aggresses, people in Gaza with such violence, we need to help them, and others say that we want a Lebanon that is neutral and positive. Neutral, that doesn't engage in war only if there's an aggression on our territory. So I fear that this leads to a civil war between the Lebanese, and this is what we want to fight against. The Lebanese experience, as I said, is important. So I hope there won't be an escalation to a major war in the region, and that Lebanon will find a way in order to reverse this, to turn things around. May I say something more? We talked about injustice committed in the past. We talked about the Israeli state and when they came to the Middle East and the commemoration that will take place on the 7th of October. There's something that I also wanted to add. I grew up with a grandfather who was born in 1900. My father is alive. He's 95 years old. So I see the whole advantage. I was able to live with people and growing up with them and understanding what their experiences were. They had a lot of Jewish friends who came to my house where I live now to party together because they traded together in the region. It was important to create a state that was against other or to integrate with us because the Arabs welcomed those who were wounded and victims in Europe. Why did things turn around? I want to invite young people to go to look down into the roots and help our friends, whether they're Arabs or Israeli, to understand that living together is possible. There are conditions. You need to be humble. Humbleness. Arrogance can never help you win the peace process. And what we are faced with are two arrogant parties that are narcissists, whether in Israel or the Hamas, Hezbollah. We are dealing with parties who are narcissists. Let's hope and pray to have people who are not so extremist. Peter, maybe?
Peter, peut-être sur cette question de la
Peter,
guerre
on
totale,
this
cette question
question of
la jeune
total
fille,
war
est-ce
asked
que
by
tu penses,
the
alors
young
là,
lady,
l'historien va céder la
the
place à
historian will
l'analyste
yield the
politique,
floor
en
to the
quelque sorte.
political
Est-ce que tu
analyst.
penses qu'on est au seuil,
Do you think
au
we're at the
moment où
threshold
une guerre totale
when a
peut
total
embraser
war
le Proche-Orient?
can trigger fire in the Middle East?
With a brief answer, I would say I'm not an astrologist. It's unlikely. It is unlikely that.
Unlikely.
Unlikely. It is possible. Anything is possible. History is unexpected. We never know what is going to happen, especially in the Middle East. But I would say the surrounding countries, for their own reasons and their own interests, and when I say their own interests, I mean their interests of the people who actually govern them, who are not the people, but I would say in places like Egypt and Syria and Jordan, and Iran, in a sense, they, for their own particular interests and reasons, they do not wish to have a huge war. If they have a war, they will be, some of them anyway, they'll be either dead or they'll be in their nice flat in Geneva or London or Washington or somewhere. So I don't see it. I see it as very serious. I see it as anything could happen. But if you force me into a corner and say yes or no, I would say I do not see a war which is going to spread even to Europe or to whatever. No.
Merci, Peter. On va prendre d'autres questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. We're going to take a few other questions.
Voilà.
Oh, yes, over there, just across from me.
Allez-y.
Please go ahead. I have a question for Mr. Peter Shambrooke. In the current context that we see today in the Middle East, do you believe that the acknowledgement from Great Britain, the mistakes that were made in the past, could improve the relationship between the two parties?
You got it? Could the recognition
by the British government?
Yes, could it change the situation right now between the two parties?
It would certainly help. It would certainly help the British if they were ever honest.
Peter,
about
your
their
microphone, Peter. Maybe closer to your mouth.
It would certainly help the British government if they were ever honest about their past, okay? Governments, especially from the great powers or the previous great powers, they absolutely hate admitting that they have ever done anything wrong in the past, okay? Because it sets a precedent. And if you think of, in English we say acknowledgement, in other words, being honest, officially honest, accountability, and then acceptance, working something out between the competing parties. Acknowledgement means that there is possibly accountability. Now, accountability in English is not just financial. It is political. It is moral, and so on. But it leads to it raises the question of reparations and finance and this kind of thing. So there will be. I can tell you the British government, the Foreign Office, because I know, the Foreign Office are not going to follow the message of my book. They're not going to follow the message of my book. They would certainly not acknowledge some of the deceit that they participated and organized. There are lots of books, British books, books in English about the past in Palestine and Britain's role in Palestine. Okay, but with my book, the Foreign Office can no longer say we do not know what we did. When I talk to British diplomats and British diplomats who've been ambassador in the Middle East and everything, basically, I'll be honest with you. And they speak Arabic, and they've been in the Arab world for 20, 30 years. Some of them still do not know what their predecessors actually did. They get trained in a certain thing, but they don't really know a lot of what the British did during the 1920s and 30s, which actually established and set up the whole system, which led to the conflict between the Jewish community and the Arab community in Palestine in the 1940s. They just don't know it. But now with my book, I claim anyway, that they can no longer say, we do not know. We do not know. And for me, acknowledgement or reconnaissance is absolutely fundamental. And I say this with my family and everything. It's the same for individuals as it is for groups, as it is for countries, fundamentally. If there is no acknowledgement, there is no trust. If there is no trust, there is the dialogue of the deaf. And I've been listening and watching to the dialogue of the deaf between Israelis and Palestinians for the last 30 years. So there needs to be what happens with Assad to really acknowledge, and we British need to acknowledge.
Peter.
We British need to acknowledge.
Alors, justement, je vais glisser une question. On va faire un peu de géopolitique.
Okay, let's do a bit of geopolitics, and I can see someone else raising their hand. I have one question.
J'y repense maintenant.
I'm thinking of this again now. In Europe, we are talking about the European lack of power, the fact that European countries are not able to agree to take action in the Middle East, mainly for one reason that is not being said, but it is obvious, because of what happened during the Second World War and the extermination of the Jews. Of course, we cannot ask Germany to take part in this conflict because of historical reasons which will continue to tie Germany for generations and generations. In that respect, France also has some heavy history with regard to the Jewish community, but in Great Britain, you were not guilty of extermination or attempt of extermination of the Jews. So you could have a liberty of freedom. Why is it that you don't have it regarding Israel?
We don't have our own independent foreign policy. We follow the United States of America. Full stop. Point à la ligne, okay? Fundamentally. Let me just say, yes, the British did not, the British were not involved in the Holocaust. But let me also say, the Palestinians were not involved in the Holocaust. And that is very important to underline. In terms of what the British government should do now, personally, my friends and other people I know, we are trying to influence the British government to officially recognize the state of Palestine, to provide some agency for the Palestinians in the diplomatic field. And when I talked to the Israeli diplomat, retired Israeli diplomat, ambassador, he said to me, psychologically, it would actually have some influence in, I mean, the Israelis would raise their eyebrows if the British recognized the state of Palestine. The British government has not recognized the state of Palestine, but the British Parliament had a vote on recognizing the state of Palestine, and it voted in large majority, I've forgotten the numbers now, but large majority to recognize the state of Parliament. So the British Parliament has recognized the state of Palestine officially, but not the British government. And but 140, more than 140 of the governments of the United Nations have recognized the state of Palestine. That is 75% of the world have recognized the state of Palestine. And we British need to do the same, and we need to do it now.
Je rappelle juste sur cette question, et je passe la parole à Assad, que sur cette question de la
Now, on this issue of the acknowledgement or recognition of the state of Palestine at the UN, which is a very current issue, part of the EU has already acknowledged the Palestinian state. And what we forget to say is that all the members of the EU today, coming back from the former communist part, recognize Palestine as a state, on top of Spain, Norway, if I'm being correct, and Slovenia, and Ireland. So Spain, I'm repeating, Spain, Norway, Slovenia, and Ireland also together have acknowledged Palestine as a state. Regarding France, the government continues to say that the willingness of the government is to acknowledge the state of Palestine, but that the time has not yet come, that it is not the appropriate time. This is the official language. Okay, now this is not to answer your question directly, Richard, but rather to come back to the main topic of what's going on here. What is my part, my share of responsibility as an individual in building peace or in what's going on in the world, here in my country or elsewhere? And this is really where I would like to hear you. I was expecting today and even yesterday, I was hearing rather one of you yesterday and even today asking publicly, and me, what about me? What are you telling me all this? What does it have to do with me? What can I do? Do you have answers?
Alors, qui se lance?
So who would like to try? Who would like to answer Assad on this point? Who would like to start answering about I? What can I do?
On coopte quelqu'un apparemment.
Alors, je pense que notre responsabilité, nous, en tant
So I think our responsibility as young people, we are in our last year of high school for most of us. We need to have a clear conscious education is important. We must be aware of what's going on, even though we might not be able to practically act, but we must be aware, mentally speaking, of what's going on and to try to listen to the various viewpoints, to listen to testimonies, storytelling. This is so enriching. so that we could get as close as possible to the truth, and so that we would not fall in the clichés and the biases and what is being said and not said, and rather that we would draw closer to the truth, and that we would try also to influence and change public opinion, to unite and to understand that we are all different, but we all have different backgrounds and storytellings which are not really that far from one another. But to be aware, to be conscious of things and to be educated, I think is the first thing that we can do.
Là-bas derrière, voilà, je voyais une main se lever.
I saw another hand being raised in the back. I'm noticing one thing. We haven't had one boy speaking. So I'm going to have to say, I'm going to have a quota of questions. So if we have several hands raising and there is a boy's hand raising, then I would take the boy's question first. But we have another girl now. Indeed, I agree with everything that you've just said. But beyond that, I think we must take actions. It's not just about ideals, such as demonstrating, going down, taking to the streets and expressing our ideas. We know that as young people, we are not always listened to by the government or by the various authorities here in France. So I think we must show that we have ideas that we want to support and stand by, and not just let people do what they want in order to get peace.
Il y avait une question ici.
There was one more question, I think from an older gentleman, maybe a bit older than average here. You have the floor, gentleman.
I would like to introduce myself. I'm Gulab Mir Rahmani. Basically, I'm from Afghanistan. With the support of the initiative in Change, I'm very happy to be here to represent and representative of Afghanistan generation. I want to raise my questions. As I know, I have the question first from the Professor Peter, because he has written a book, as he has already displayed over there. As you are the professor of history, yes, that is very nice book, as the title is mentioned. As I'm from Afghanistan, I am working as an education activist in Afghanistan. Now, and as a voluntary, I am working for supporting education in Afghanistan girls, which is already the doors of high schools and universities already stopped in Afghanistan. I would like to ask the question like this, because you're the professor of history. What do you think that during 23 or 21 years war in the past 21 years, the British governments, with all collaboration of NATO and USA, they come to in Afghanistan to make a stabilized government and make a peace and develop education and also democracy, sustainable democracy in Afghanistan. But after 21 years, the British government has left Afghanistan without fighting with the Taliban. And as if you want to write an article in the future, who is the winner of the war in Afghanistan? The Taliban is the winner, or the NATO, USA, or the British government is the winner of this war in the current moment?
I'm sorry, I can't even, I know it's English, but I can't.
Okay. The question was on Britain involvement in the war in Afghanistan. Yes. The gentleman was saying Britain and the USA and NATO came to bring democracy and kind of civilization to Afghanistan, but then withdraw. And who is the winner now, according to you, of these 21 years of war in Afghanistan? The West was the winner, or the Taliban is the final winner?
If you want to write an article, what will be an article about?
Can I just answer that? Okay. Let me just correct one thing. The British did not come to Afghanistan to spread democracy and freedom. Full stop. What's that? They may have said so, but that's what they always say. That's what they always say. We've come to spread freedom and democracy and human rights and liberate the women and educate people and everything else like that. But no, they followed the Americans. We followed the Americans.
La France aussi.
So did France. France was also involved in the NATO operation in Afghanistan.
And we have a budget, the government has a budget, and therefore, no. So, in a sense, I would say the Taliban have won for the moment, but the people of Afghanistan have not necessarily won, having the Taliban in charge. But that's just my personal opinion.
Je vais poser une question à Assad directement liée à ce que monsieur vient de dire. Au fond, Assad, vous étiez à votre manière.
Assad, in your own way, you were a Lebanese Taliban in some way. Yes, absolutely. Does this help you understand the mindset of Afghan Taliban of today? Not only the Taliban, but the Hamas, all the other groups. I pray for these people. I pray that they would come to realize that these things would not lead to anything. I pray that they would look in the mirror. I pray that they would see in others and that they would remember their own definition of humanity. That is the essence of this conflict. To end now, to conclude, and I have one question for Wadia afterwards. That's my last word for now. But I would like us to remember to ask ourselves, what is my personal responsibility? That's the first thing. The beginning or the trigger of a new change in this world. I would need to live out what I am preaching. That's the first thing. The second thing, when you point to someone to accuse them, you are responsible, it's your fault. Then if you point one finger, three fingers would point back to you. What is my share of responsibility in this conflict, in this lack of understanding of the other?
Wadia, j'avais une question qui découle. Cette question me vient à l'esprit en écoutant.
Now, one more question comes to mind as I'm listening to our Afghan friend of the work. You are working with teachers in Lebanon. Now, how in Afghanistan could we work also with teachers when, as of today, Taliban forbid education of girls? How do you do it when in a country half of the population is not allowed to go to school? Are there any solutions? Could you work with teachers from Afghanistan today?
C'est une question surprise parce que j'ai pensé comment travailler avec les enseignants de Gaza maintenant. Il y a beaucoup de.
It's an interesting question. I've already thought of working with teachers from Gaza, and there is already something under preparation. I know we have Japanese colleagues who have worked with Afghan teachers for some time online. So online teaching is a solution. Now I know that if somebody wants something, there are many, many ways of doing it. So it could be online, through tools, through online teaching, maybe inviting them also to come out from time to time to go and get this information with some foreign support. We are working on Education Today Society for Tomorrow in India, with a country which is in between the two, with an international approach. So maybe that could be an opportunity. So everything is possible. And what this gentleman did there is already quite something, and it shows that nothing is impossible.
Spencer, qui...
Exactement sur cette question, cet Afghan, c'est un demandeur d'asile qui est arrivé en France.
This request for asylum came to France. A person who asked to stay in France, who is welcome with other people who have suffered from war, hasn't seen his family for 3.5 years, and he is one among 40 professors, Afghan professors, and We have 200 in total. He manages an online university for girls in Kabul. 6,000 young girls and women in Kabul, in his university, without 1 cent, without any support, but France has welcomed him very quickly. He would like France to welcome his family as well. He hasn't seen them in more than 3.5 years. So he has just arrived here, and it's exactly what you told us. The girls in Kabul are protected inside their homes. A Taliban cannot go into the homes. Even though people on the streets were hit and were harassed and were beaten, but this continues, this keeps on going on a daily basis. Thank you.
On va terminer.
We are going to end by a question, and I'd like you to give me a very short answer. You will have seen that aside from our Afghan friend, only the young girls, ladies, have expressed themselves. Most, we have a man's hand up in the air. So we hadn't seen you. Sorry about that. The last question, I will ask mine afterwards. Apologies. Hello, I'm sorry for taking the floor so late, but I personally often feel affected by what is happening in the world, and especially powerless, faced with all the horrors I see. Even if it touches me, what can I concretely do besides demonstrating? Because I think it's useless in the end. What can I really do concretely in order to try to change things in the world on my own level? Hassan. I thank you for this question. I was waiting for it for 3 days already. Well, listen, first of all, don't feel powerless. It is normal to ask oneself or feel you're powerless at times. I do understand you. And when I was a victim of my environment, I felt the same thing. So, first of all, you need to see what you think personally, and then extend it to the family and where you are in your high school, university, at work, etc. This is a practice that needs to be a daily practice and will assert yourself in your convictions by showing the right example, in fact, the good example. It is a disease that can be passed around. You need to be active for peace and for humanity. This is a disease that can be transmitted. So if somebody here in the room talked about movements, you also need to gather with people who are like you, who are similar to you, and who can adopt your way of seeing things. You need to campaign. And among young people, you are the future. For France, you are the future of the world. So I am part of the past that hasn't managed the world well. Now it's up to you to do it. At the same time, by understanding our mistakes. We are here to explain what went wrong, what we did wrong, and do not do what we did. Try to change things now that you know the situation. And not in my time, we didn't have combatants for peace, the initiatives for change, or all of that. It didn't exist. So this is what I can answer. So we'll close on these words. Thank you very much. Thanks to our 3 speakers. And thank you. Thank you to the Forum Normandie pour la Paix, Normandy for Peace. What happens here is fantastic. Thank you for initiatives to change. And Spencer, who came on stage just before, it's thanks to him that all this has taken place. I'd like to give him a big round of applause.
Spencer et Martine, pardon, mais...
Spencer and Martin. Apologies, I turned to Spencer because he was here. Yes? Okay, men stand up and ladies are humble in the background.